Welcome to Scandal Water, where the tea is hot and the conversation lively.
Your hosts, Candy
And Ashley,
will discuss a peculiar story somehow related to the entertainment industry. This podcast might not change the world, but it just might satisfy your thirst for an intriguing tale.
Oh, it's that time of day. Tune in and hear what the ladies say. It's time to bend your ear when the silver screen appears. Stories about the stage and screen and everything in between. So come on and join the fun. The curtain opens in 3, 2, 1.
Hello, Ashley.
hello, Candy.
You know, it occurs to me as we are recording today, of course for us, we're still in March, but this is probably coming out the week that a lot of people are celebrating spring break.
Oh, wow.
I know. So very appropriate that it's a beautiful day today for us too, nice and sunny, and we've got some cats basking in the sunshine behind us.
Yes,
so.
Scotty was with us for the first round, episode 1, and now he's left us to a sunbeam.
That's right. And again, we said this last time, I'll say it again. I love that we are recording on a beautiful sunshiny day because we're talking about some topics that are kind of sad this month, although very important and very meaningful. So this is going to be a really good month, but just a little sad. In fact, I'm going to start with something very sad. This is a quote from a book that you and I read recently. Hi, my name is Matthew, although you may know me by another name. My friends call me Matty, and I should be dead. If you like, you can consider what you're about to read to be a message from the beyond, my beyond. That was the beginning of Matthew Perry's book, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. And a memoir is actually the last part of the title. I don't know how it hit you, but it took me aback when I read those words.
Yes. There's several notes I made in here of how he references his own death, and reading it after his death really, really impacts you, I think, more than if you had read it while he was still with us.
Right. Yeah.
And knowing what happened to him.
Absolutely. Like, it just drove home the tragedy because he was writing that. That book was published in November of 2022. And he was saying, I mean, he was so hopeful. And he wrote those words having no idea that less than a year later he would be gone. So, I mean, I was registering he really is speaking to me from his beyond.
Yes. On page 193, the last line said, "But there is still time." And I wrote, "And there was not." It just breaks your heart.
It absolutely does. And so our theme this month is Gone Too Soon. And we knew from the very beginning that
He's the one that inspired this month.
He absolutely is. We knew we wanted to do an episode centered around Matthew Perry and honor him, his work, and who he was to everyone. I'm going to ask you, do you remember where you were or what you were doing when you heard about his passing?
Gosh, I don't remember. Oh, I don't know. My days kind of run together with the stuff that I do.
Right.
So I assumed that I was home. You and I may have been together. There's been a couple times we weren't together. Do you know what you were doing?
I absolutely do.
What was it?
It was one of those things that I'll remember forever.
Really?
I was on my way. I was driving to a Halloween party dressed in costume when my friend Sarah texted saying that he had passed. I was absolutely shocked. And
I may have seen it as a Facebook thing. That might have been something that came across. I was like, no, are you kidding me? Thinking it was a joke.
Right.
But I don't remember what I was doing.
Yeah, I almost couldn't register it at first. And then I remember Sarah using some words as she was talking about it. Of course, I'm hearing it through Siri, through my car. It's reading aloud her words. And she's saying things about how she felt devastated, that it was, she kind of felt gutted because she felt like she had grown up with him because of the TV show Friends.
Right.
And so that's something that I'll always think of. And he is special to me because of Friends. I think you and I have talked about this before. That's not necessarily a show that you were really connected to.
No, I did not grow up watching that one. By the time Friends came out, I was off doing other stuff. My massive TV consumption happened when I was a lot younger. So by the time, I think this came out mid-90s, right? I was off doing other stuff. I had other interests. So television had was lesser in my life. And I just, because I was also 15 or 15 to 18, 95, somewhere around that, I would have been about 15. I wasn't really into their lifestyle. It just didn't jive with me. So I've seen clips, I've seen certain episodes, I've seen off and on, but no, I did not watch it. I haven't seen the reruns. I saw his films. So that's where one of my favorite films, and was on our short list for February, was Fools Rush In.
Yes.
With him and Salma Hayek. I love that film. I love the music in it. It's my favorite film of his. And he went on to say he thought it was his best film, which I was like, oh, good. He liked it too.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where I know him is movies.
Yeah. Well, he will always be Chandler to me, first and foremost. But I also do recall being impressed with certain different projects he took on later. For example, I actually saw, oh goodness, what was the name of it? Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip.
Yeah.
He was really good in that. It was not a long-lived project, and I don't even honestly remember a lot about the premise, but I just remember thinking Matthew Perry is a very different character in this particular series, and he is believable. I believe him as somebody.
I thought he was a great actor.
Yeah, very different from the Chandler character that we knew him as. But moving back, I guess, into this timeline, we all heard about his passing, but the autopsy report actually took a few weeks to come out, and it gave a little bit more detail about how Matthew actually died. Here's what I discovered, and I don't believe I knew this at the time. Piecing these details together, it kind of hit home to me even more, because he had gone out to play pickleball that morning around 11 a.m., the day of his death, which was October 28th, 2023, and he returned home 2 hours later, according to different witnesses who they pieced this together in police reports, and those were included with the autopsy. So this is coming from those reports.
Right.
Matthew's assistant had gone out to run errands shortly after that, and that was the last time that he was seen alive. When his assistant came back to Matthew's home, the assistant found him, quote, floating face down in the heated end of the pool, according to the autopsy report. The report went on to say the death was accidental. There were no signs of foul play. In fact, his cause of death is listed as, quote, acute effects of ketamine, with contributing factors listed as, quote, drowning, coronary artery disease, and buprenorphine effects. I looked that up because I didn't know what that was. It's a medication used to treat opioid use disorder.
Okay.
The police pronounced him dead at 4:17 p.m. He was 54.
That's still so young.
Oh, I know. So I think most of us have heard that, Matthew Perry talk about his addiction. He was very open about struggling with addiction for many years, but reportedly he had been clean for 19 months. The autopsy report said he had been receiving ketamine infusion therapy for depression and anxiety, and the last treatment had occurred a week and a half before his death. Now, he had been responding to treatment, they said, and was in, quote, good spirits, according to a witness who again gave information for this report. However, there were high levels of ketamine found in his system.
That's so weird to me.
Yeah, and that's what led the medical examiner's office to conclude that his cause of death was not from that prior infusion therapy treatment, but was rather some other method of taking in this ketamine. They said that the drug's half-life is just 3 to 4 hours, so they don't think it could be part of that therapy. So they have no idea
where he got this.
Yeah, right. They don't really know how it happened
because it's a relaxant. Yeah. So it's horrifying, but it sounds as though that he had this and it relaxed him to the point he could not get out of the water.
Right. Just so tragic. But that's how we lost him. And so knowing that we wanted to honor him, we got his book.
Yes.
We've both read it, and we're going to be talking about that in just a little bit. But what I thought I would do first is share just a brief overview of his life, because we're going to talk about his life a whole lot more as we discuss the book. But I thought I want to make sure we honor some of his main accomplishments.
Sure.
So I'm going to give you just a brief overview, and then we'll, of course, talk a whole lot more in detail as we start going through some of the things that really spoke to us when we were reading. I did pull from a lot of different sources, but I wanted to give a shout out to to a People magazine article that was one of my primary sources in giving me some information about Matthew's life. He was born August 19th, 1969 in Williamstown, Massachusetts, and he was the only child of Suzanne, who was a Canadian journalist and at one point the press secretary to Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, and also John, who was a character actor, probably best known for his Old Spice commercials.
I did not know he was the Old Spice guy.
He was the
He
Old
is very
Spice man.
handsome. He talks in his book about how handsome his dad was.
That's right. He was very proud of his father,
Yes,
it
he
sounded
was.
like. But unfortunately, the two divorced before Matthew turned 1, which meant that he spent a lot of time traveling back and forth from Ottawa to Los Angeles as he would go off to visit his father. And this is something that I know comes up in the book in great
Yes.
detail, so I am sure we'll be coming back to that. His mother went on later to marry Dateline journalist Keith Morrison. That was when Matthew was around 12, and they went on to have 4 more children together. So again, this was something that impacted Matthew. Matthew, I did not know about his talent as a tennis player.
didn't either.
That was such a surprise to me. He was actually on a path to become a professional tennis player in Canada. But even though he was nationally ranked by the age of 14, he ended up having some conflicts with his family at home, and he moved to LA to be with his dad, and it was less than a year later that he realized he was not on the path to become a pro in the U.S.
Right.
So that dream kind of faded. I should clarify, at this point, his dad is remarried, so he went to live with his dad's stepmom and their daughter Marie. Knowing that he was not going to become a tennis player, he tried his hand at acting. And in 1985, he played George Gibbs in Our Town at the private Buckley School, and he did a really great job.
He got bitten by the acting
He
bug.
did. And this fella started getting some parts. He started landing some guest spots on sitcoms like Charles in Charge and Silver Spoons. And he became a regular on the 1987 to 88 Fox comedy Second Chance. Several things like this until his first big break came when he was 16 years old and he won a small role in A Night in the Life of Jimmy Reardon starring River Phoenix.
He loved River
He
Phoenix.
did. He spoke so highly of him.
Everybody does. Anytime you hear anybody talk about River Phoenix, they always talk about how amazing he was.
I would like to do an episode on
We
him
should.
sometime. Yes. Well, this led to more TV roles, including a 3-episode arc on Growing Pains in 1989, and then he got to play Valerie Bertinelli's younger brother on the sitcom Sydney, and ultimately, he committed to play a role, an important role, in a sci-fi TV sitcom called LAX 2194, but was luckily released to audition for the role of Chandler on Friends. We will talk more about how that all played out
yes.
because there's a whole story there. But this is where I think he came across all of our radars. And this is also where, while we were seeing his fame skyrocket, thinking he was on the path to superstardom and just having the time of his life, he was also actually in a huge struggle with alcohol and drugs. He had been drinking since he was a teen, but he reports that he got hooked on opioids after a jet ski accident during the production of his 1997 film that you mentioned, Fools Rush In.
Yeah.
He said, quote, "I hadn't had a pill before that. That first high from it was euphoria. And then I didn't need to drink, which made you sweat and made you smell of alcohol." He went on to say that at the height of his addiction, he was taking 55 Vicodin a
I
day.
can't imagine that.
I know, and had dropped to 128 pounds.
Golly.
Yeah. But even despite that, his career was flourishing. His most successful film, economically, was 2000's The Whole Nine Yards, co-starring Bruce Willis. It grossed over $100 million worldwide, led to a 2004 sequel. He earned an Emmy nomination for Friends in 2002 and 2 more for his work on The West Wing. In 2007, he got his 4th Emmy nomination for the Ron Clark Story, which is where he played a real-life teacher in the New York City public school system. He went on to do several more projects over the next 10 or 12 years. Series, some of those we've already mentioned, Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip. He did Mr. Sunshine in 2011, Go On in 2012, The Odd Couple, 3 seasons of that starting in 2015. So he was busy. He continued to do guest starring spots on different shows, and in between wrote the play The End of Longing and starred in it as kind of a little version, I guess you would say, of himself. It was described as a lost soul who drinks his life away.
Yeah.
And then he told People After Friends and getting typecast as Chandler, what I tried to do for about 10 years was play against that and do some drama work, and had some success in that. And then I realized there's no getting away from Friends. People still love it as much as they loved it a long time ago. So part of this time was him kind of fighting against
Which usually
type.
happens with a role that you're so well defined by. That'll usually happen, you know.
So his career rolled on, but he was finding that his addiction and his struggles with that were escalating. When he was 49 years old, he was hospitalized for 5 months after his colon burst following all that time of opioid abuse. He talked about how that really led him to think more about supporting others. And he even said that after 14 surgeries on his stomach, he saw his scars as a blessing. He said it's a lot of reminders to stay sober. He also talked about the motivation that helped him to stop drinking when he had a religious experience in his kitchen where he said he sensed the presence of God. He said, quote, "There was just this light. The kitchen disappeared and I felt loved and understood. Maybe when you die, it's not the end. I hope that's the case." And so in 2022, when he wrote the book and was doing all the publicity interviews, Matthew came across as being very hopeful for his future. He said he was ready to try to have a relationship again. He said he would like to be a father because he'd been around so many kids growing up. And he was looking forward
To life.
and to so much. And that brings us, I think, to talk about the book.
Yes.
Well, before we start talking about the book, I wanted to play just a brief clip from an interview that Matthew had with Tom Power. This was one of those publicity junket type things he was doing. He was kind of on a tour, I think, to do a lot of publicity related to the book. This interview, I thought, was fantastic.
Okay.
I'm so glad that I watched this, and after I share this brief clip with you, I will tell you why it was so powerful to me. But just to kind of set this up, he talks about a few different ideas in this clip. It's about 1.5 minutes long, but I think it gives you a preview of some of the different topics that I suspect you and I are going to be discussing.
Wonderful things happen in my life. I'm incredibly grateful for all of them, but that's the ticket for me. Is helping people on a large scale or helping, one guy and seeing the light turn on and him understanding what is happening. Because that's the problem. You don't know what's happening. You can't share it with anybody because something's wrong and they might make you stop, which you don't want to do. A friend of mine said, if you're drinking and like the police came to your door and said, if you drink tonight, we're going to take you to jail. You'd start packing for jail because you have to drink. You can't not drink, And the other thing, man, is I didn't want this and I didn't want to have this problem, No. And it's so cunning, baffling, and powerful, alcoholism and addiction. And, a lot of people say, because the reason this book has done so well and been taken into the hearts of so many people is because everybody's starting to know or have addiction in their life. People have a brother or a sister or a grandfather or a close friend who has addiction in their life, and they need to know from the addict's point of view, in this case me, how horrible it is and how they're not weak. We're not weak. I'm a pretty strong, resilient guy. But it has nothing to do with weakness. It's a disease that we have, and we don't know that we have it. And if somebody says, just stop, you want to punch them in the face.
So I'm going to tell you that interview, I got to actually hear many different interviews or excerpts from interviews. This one I watched in its entirety a couple of times, actually. And it was so powerful to me because I'm going to confess that Matthew Perry, in my mind, I so closely associate him with Chandler that I do think in some ways I kind of almost blended the real man with that character.
Because they've also said it is so much him.
Well, and yes, he did say that repeatedly. But when I read the book, I didn't hear Chandler. Like he seemed so different from Chandler. I struggled a little bit. It kind of made me think about when we talked about Bruce Willis, when he was so beloved, his little smart aleck character on Moonlighting was so beloved, and then when he translated to the big screen, it wasn't making that transfer. They were afraid people were not going to like him, and they had to make him a little more vulnerable in order for him to make that leap onto the big screen. I think that was a little bit of what I was experiencing here. I was reading Matthew's words, and I was thinking, that's not hitting me sometimes as funny. It almost seems a little critical or a
Right.
little,
Right.
I don't know. It wasn't landing for me. And when I got to hear him telling so many of the same stories, sharing so many of the same philosophies in his voice during this interview,
I bet we would have had a different experience listening to the audiobook versus reading
I
it.
bet we would have. I bet we would have. So that's one of the reasons why I loved the interview and why I wanted you all to hear a little piece of it right off the bat, because to me, it absolutely changed how I saw some of the things that he shared in the book. So Ashley, what's one thing that struck you as you were reading the book?
I had an overall feeling of sadness. I just felt so sad for him. I just wanted to hug him and say, baby, it's okay. It's okay. It's going to be okay. It doesn't feel like it's going to be okay, but you are so loved. And I am so sorry that you feel this way. I just was dripping with sadness for him and the sense of foreboding.
Yeah, because we knew.
I know it's coming and you don't. And I'm like, oh, honey, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
That's the way I felt.
I totally get that.
What did you?
Well, something else that struck me is, I'm just going to be real.
Yeah.
It made me sad that I felt like Matthew really believed deep down in his heart, even though he would deny it several times, I really think he believed that his parents contributed to a lot of his struggles. There were so many different places in the book where he talked about feeling abandoned.
Yeah.
Because his dad left them when he was, 9 months old, and kind of turned him over in a parking lot somewhere.
Yep.
He talked about calling himself, he misunderstood the phrase. He would call himself a lonely child instead of an only child. He had a whole piece where the title of the book was almost Unaccompanied Minor.
I know.
Because a huge thing that was traumatic to him was when his parents would put him
On
a
an airplane by himself.
with some kind of a note pinned to him. I think it said Unaccompanied Minor. And he would be so terrified and feel so alone and so displaced until he saw that parent come into sight. And it almost became a metaphor for his whole life and how he felt as a person in general.
I have a note, the second note that I wrote here. Is the first 36 pages are teeming with sadness and loneliness and desperately wanting to belong. How far-reaching childhood is. He's careful to say how he felt in that moment versus what he knows to be true as an adult. He did feel abandoned, but he also adores his parents.
Yes, it was almost like he worshiped them, but didn't believe that they valued him back. And so he was always trying to prove himself or get their attention in some way. In fact, you know what? I believe I have a clip, if I'm remembering correctly, that might speak to this. Give me just a second, and I'm going to let you hear what Matthew shared about this.
That your mom worked for the Prime Minister.
That's
your mom
right.
worked for Prime Minister Trudeau. And that you say that he was the most charismatic man, had stolen your mother from you in the daytime.
Well, she was, Alice and Janney in the West Wing. That's what my mother was for Pierre Trudeau. And she was beginning to become a little bit of a celebrity herself, being seen with him a lot, And I always have this image of this big ballroom, like this room like this big ballroom, and my mother walking in and taking all sort of the glory because she was beautiful and people just knew her. And I was like 5 feet behind her, and all I wanted was for her to turn around and, focus on me and like be with me. You took me, and I want your company. I want you to help me. I'm a kid, and she never really did that. And what I've realized as an older guy is that I still do that a little bit.
What do you mean?
And this is all part of addiction and all that stuff, but I still want the unavailable, the person who's not turning around. I still want that person to turn around and notice me. And that forms, as a guy who doesn't drink or do drugs, that's like a little bit of a drug for me when a girl goes, I don't want you. Oh, no, I do want you. It's a little bit of a drug for me because all I wanted was for her to turn around or mention me on the news or whatever. Yeah. And she, she didn't do anything wrong. She was just doing her job. But that's something that, from a young age, it hurt me.
So I thought that was really telling because not only do we hear him just openly talk about the fact that he felt neglected or ignored by his parents, that he did not get the attention he wanted, but he also takes it to that second point. There's actually, I think, been a lot of criticism about the fact that in the book he seems to, I don't know, not treat women very nicely. Like all of his relationships, it feels like
He's using them.
yes, or he keeps them at arm's length. When they start to really like him, he
backs off.
gets out. But I think he named it there. He said that's now
It's the drug.
it was his thing. It was his thing. They don't want me. Well, then I'm going to go for it. And then once they wanted him,
It's not interesting anymore.
it was done.
Follow up on what he said about his parents. In the book on page 185, made a note of this particular paragraph. He said, I needed to remember that my dad left because he was afraid, and my mom was a kid who was just doing her best. It wasn't her fault that she had to commit so much time to the Canadian Prime Minister. It was never going to be a 9-to-5 job, even with a kid at home. But I couldn't see that back then, and here we are.
You know, that was something else that was interesting was you could almost see, however you want to phrase it, him battling with himself.
Yeah.
He would literally say, not their fault. And then you would,
But also this.
right. And you could feel him going, oh, but they did make me feel this way, or they didn't do this that
Yeah.
I really needed. And then he would come back and be like, but I don't blame them. It's not their fault. Oh, gosh, it was just so sad. It was just so sad.
Yeah, I also wrote here, it's so haunting to read after his death as he talks so openly about how he almost died and why was he spared. It almost feels as though at this point this book was the thing he had to complete. So why? We have yet to know. Like,
Right.
why?
Right. Well, I have one last thought that I wanted to add, just kind of a piggyback on what we've already said, and then why don't we take a break before we continue? All that talk about wanting his mother to pay attention to him, his father to pay attention to him, women, I am no one to diagnose somebody. I am armchairing, but really, I kept thinking, you're being crippled with insecurity. I felt like that he believed he was just unworthy of love, that people were gonna abandon him, that he didn't have something of value that would make somebody stay with him. So then his MO became, I'll just leave everybody first. I'll just get out then.
Yeah, right. You're correct with the not diagnosing. I do not. Obviously, we've said clearly that we are just two people. It had a little bit, the fear of abandonment had a little bit of hints of borderline personality to me, a little bit of what I've studied about that. I mean, you know how it goes. It just felt a little bit like that. Oh, these are some traits of people who have had borderline, who have said they've struggled with, I'm going to leave you before you leave me type thing.
Yeah. Well, since we've now put ourselves out there as being totally unqualified
Absolutely
to
unqualified.
make any of these statements that we've just made, let's take a quick break and we'll come back to talk more about the book.
Hey friends! When Candy and I were brainstorming who we wanted to take our new publicity photos for Scandal Water, we knew we felt strongly about supporting someone local, someone who we had worked with before, someone we trusted, and someone we knew would have a clever way to make our quirky vision come to life. Once we laid out our goals, there was barely a need for discussion because could the choice be any more clear? Bree Highshoe Photography delivered on all points. Our session was lighthearted, collaborative, and fulfilled our vision perfectly. It was the whole 9 yards. You can see examples of her work and reach her at breehphotography.com. That's BREEH photography.com. Don't be a fool. Rush to her website and book your own appointment today. Cheers.
And we are back.
Yeah, and while we were on the break, I looked up because I thought, why did I write down borderline personality? And it's on page 13. Again, in case you didn't hear it before, I don't know anything about people with borderline personality. I've just done some armchairing of my own and heard from people who have been diagnosed with this. So this paragraph is on page 13 toward the bottom. He says, I feel like I'm not enough. You can't give away something you do not have. Most of the time I have these nagging thoughts. I am not enough. I don't matter. I'm too needy. These thoughts make me uncomfortable. I need love, but I don't trust it. If I drop my game, my Chandler, and show you who I really am, you might notice me, but worse, you might notice me and leave me. And I can't have that. I won't survive that. Not anymore. It will turn me into a speck of dust and annihilate me. So I will leave you first. I will fabricate in my mind that something went wrong with you, and I'll believe it. And I'll leave.
Oh, goodness.
That's what I mean. It's so sad.
It is. Well, moving on to a different point, in that excerpt that I played for you guys from his interview, he talked about wanting everyone to understand just how horrible it is to struggle with the addictions, that specifically the ones he talked about, which were alcoholism and then his drug addiction. And he also went on to say, whether you're dealing with something like that yourself, you probably know somebody nowadays in our world. We probably know somebody who is. And he talked also about it being a disease, you know, that it, you know. So piggybacking on those points, I don't even know what the word is. It was just sad and moving to watch how it unfolded in his life. You know, he told the story of how as a 9-month-old baby, because doctors didn't know any better, they prescribed phenobarbital to him because he was colicky. And he is convinced as he was writing his book and talking in these interviews, he was convinced that was why he didn't sleep well all his life. And he thinks that it definitely gave him some kind of a predisposition. But then when he was talking about that experience on Fools Rush In, when he said he was being paid all this money, he had this crazy idea that he was going to go, you know, jet skiing. And of course, because he was the star, they wouldn't tell him no. They didn't want to tell him no. So they let him take that spin and he hurt himself. And so because it was important, he had to continue being in his TV show and filming this film. They called a doctor who came by his trailer and they handed him a single pill in a plastic package and told him, take this when you're done with, you know, this filming this part and everything will be fine. And I wrote down from the book that Matthew said, quote, I stashed that pill in my pocket, and I swear to God, I think if I'd never taken it, none of the next 3 decades would have gone the way they did. Who knows? I just know it was really bad. That was from page 116. And he goes on to talk about the euphoric feeling he got and how then he called the doctor to say, hey, it worked great. And he got a prescription for 40 more. And he goes on with a quote that says, a year and a half later, I was taking 55 of these pills a day. I weighed 128 pounds when I checked into Hazelden Rehab in Minnesota. My life in ruins. And you just go, oh my goodness, how simple was that tiny step that led to him saying, my life is in ruins. It just absolutely, I don't know, it just kind of gives you chills thinking about how one simple accident, one simple choice, one simple doctor not saying no really took him down this path. Well, what's something else that you marked down, Ashley?
We're just in between sadnesses.
I know.
Okay, now what else made you sad? Let's talk about something a little controversial that happened. On page 50, he got in big trouble for this. I'm going to read it to you. Because when I read it, I was like, oh, yep. It goes back to River Phoenix. But it says, page 50, why is it that the original thinkers like River Phoenix and Heath Ledger die, but Keanu Reeves still walks among us?
I know. And when I read that just smacked me in the face.
Yeah. That was mean. And he got in big trouble for it because Keanu is got a reputation for being the kindest, sweetest, most giving, gave away most of his Matrix salary to like the crew. And of all the people to pick on and say, Keanu Reeves still walks among us, you pick him? And he says he picked it at random. But really, could it also be a little bit of that jealousy that Keanu has thrived? You know, I don't know. It just felt a little bit like, why this guy? Why'd you have to pick on him?
I agree with you. I mean, of all people to pick, Keanu comes across as being just
the sweetest.
And
you're saying, you were saying that why can't he be dead and we still have River and Heath?
But the other point that I can't help pointing out is so much of humor is mean. Like,
I know.
In our world today, like, would anybody have raised a fuss if he had made that same awful comment and put a different actor's name in there instead? Like, because he's still saying this person should be dead instead of these guys.
I think it was a poor taste joke. I think whoever he put there, I think he would have gotten in trouble.
Right.
I don't think it's so much that it's Keanu. It's that, whoa, dude, that was too far. That's a joke too far.
Right. Absolutely.
I think he even talks badly about him again later in the book.
He came back to it again because I noted it. I was like,
I did too.
Are
I can't
you
find
kidding
it right
me?
Now. You doubled down on this?
Yes. And I think that actually to kind of zoom out just a bit, looking at the book as a whole, I was very conscious of Matthew understanding that he was trying to actually walk that fine line and try to do both. He wanted to be very reflective and very personal, and he wanted it to be this memoir of his life. But then I felt like he was also very conscious of, but I'm supposed to be funny and quippy and clever. Where can I insert a joke? How can I make this part more humorous? And I think that was just something he was working so hard to do. Yeah. Oh, it actually really hit me wrong when I read it.
I had heard about of course, we both had heard about the controversy when we read it, and then coming across it, knowing it, it's like, yeah, that wasn't bad taste, Matthew.
Yeah.
But let's go on to, if you want, I don't know what you've got going. Let's go to the good stuff.
Okay.
Let's go to the good stuff about, like, on page 52, I'm not going to read the quote. I'm just going to write my note. He admits that his parents were right not to be together. They found the person they were meant to be with. And that's a huge revelation. That's a huge thing for him to get to, because a lot of it, he wanted his parents to be back together. I think he kind of resented the two step parents. And then it just dawned on him, you know what? They are with the people that they're supposed to be with. And I give him props for admitting that and saying, my parents are with who they need to be with.
Yeah. And if we're going to talk about the good things, there is no overlooking the theme that was so prevalent throughout the entire book, which was that he had realized his next mission was to help other people.
Right.
He, more than being an actor or a director or a writer, whatever, he felt like his purpose in life, what he needed to do, what made him feel valuable, good person, was being able to help others. And so that's something admirable too.
I think this follows up with a little bit of what you just said. On page 185, he says, I needed to realize that when I died, I wanted my friends' credit to be way down on the list of things I had accomplished. I needed to remind myself to be nice to people, to have them bumping into me be a happy experience, not one that necessarily had to fill me with dread, as though that was all that mattered. I needed to be kind, to love well, to listen better, to give unconditionally. It was time to stop being such a scared person, I'm replacing person with what he wrote, and realize that as situations came up, I would be able to handle them because I was strong. So it's just starting to show that he is having this change of heart and really starting to do the work of, I need to do better and be better. And how can I do that?
Right. And I feel like one of his answers to that question of how can I do that, he seemed to be focusing in on spirituality as one thing that was helping him grow. He came back to the idea of that experience in the kitchen where he sensed the presence of God. He came back to that experience several times throughout the book. And even towards the end, he refers back to it once more, and he says, some might write it off as a near-death experience, but it was there and it was God. And then even later, God is everywhere. You just have to clear your channel or you'll miss it. So for him, that was another answer that really kind of helped him to find himself and to find his way forward.
Do you want me to read the passage?
Oh, sure.
Okay, here's the passage about what happened in the kitchen. It's on page 159. He says, God, please help me, I whispered. Show me that you are here. God, please help me. As I prayed, the little wave in the air transformed into a small golden light. As I kneeled, the light slowly began to get bigger and bigger until it was so big that it encompassed the entire room. It was like I was standing on the sun. I had stepped on the surface of the sun. What was happening? And why was I starting to feel better? And why was I not terrified? The light engendered a feeling more perfect than the most perfect quantity of drugs I had ever taken. Feeling euphoric now, I did get scared and tried to shake it off, but there was no shaking this off. It was way bigger than me. My only choice was to surrender to it, which was not hard because it felt so good. The euphoria had begun at the top of my head and slowly seeped down throughout my entire body. I must have sat there for 5, 6, 7 minutes filled with it. My blood hadn't been replaced with warm honey, which we will say is what he says that drugs made him feel like, is that his blood had been replaced with warm honey. So that's what he was referring to. Again, my blood hadn't been replaced with warm honey. I was warm honey, and for the first time in my life, I was in the presence of love and acceptance and filled with an overwhelming feeling that everything was going to be okay. I knew now that my prayer had been answered. I was in the presence of God.
Yeah. And that was such a profound experience for
Yeah.
him. As we said, he
Yeah.
came back to that.
Didn't he
again and
stop
again.
drinking after this experience?
He did for quite some time. And then,
Did he have a relapse? I thought it was something that I will say. Reading this book, I got a little confused
did
on the
too.
timeline.
Yes.
So I was under the impression that he stopped drinking permanently after this experience, but I could be very wrong because it was a little hard for me to follow.
let's step back and talk about that for just a second. If you look at the reviews, that is something that other people comment
Did they?
on as well. A few people said they wondered if he had an editor who helped him because it
Are
felt
you saying that he didn't? It feels like he didn't.
that was what they questioned.
Okay.
You know, is there did he use an editor? Was there someone who helped him? Because it seems as though it could have benefited from more of that. But the timeline jumped around. It was hard to follow, and there were just some places where it felt repetitive, where it seemed like you'd heard this experience or this story before, but it sounded as though he thought he was telling you for the first time. It was just a little confusing. So I could be wrong. You may very well be right that
I don't know.
was when he gave it up, but I'm not quite sure.
I do remember noting because I read later, I was like, oh, so I had read, I think what we read later is that there is a relapse, but then he refers later to this time being the last, because it's called interludes. So some of the stuff is interludes and some of it is chronological and some I'm going to hop out of the timeline and I'm talking to you from now. So that's what's a little bit
Right.
confusing about it. So I think just read it we were reading it closely knowing that we were going to do an
Right.
episode on it. Probably it won't be that bad if you're just reading it for consumption.
Right. Yeah. Well, thinking about the ending of his book, again, it's like on the one hand, it felt so good. And on the other hand, it just felt so sad knowing what was going to happen. But he was so hopeful at the end of the book. He talked about for AA, he had made a list of all the people he was mad at and why. And he had to read that to his sponsor. And then he said, reading that list and seeing this wedding that was taking place made him reflect. He said, quote, I sensed an awakening that I was here for more than this big, terrible thing, that I could help people, love them because of how far down the scale I had gone. I had a story to tell, a story that could really help people, and helping others had become the answer for me. So in this ending, he talks about his mission to help others. He talked about hearing his mother tell him she was proud of him and what that meant to him. He talks about being hopeful for the future, that for the first time he thought maybe he could sustain a relationship. He wanted a teammate.
I know.
He wanted children. And he said he thought he would be a great father. And then he also talked about feeling gratitude. And then again, coming back to spirituality, you know, knowing that God had made an important impact in his life and wanting to really kind of follow up on that. So that's my paraphrase, but that's basically how he ended.
Yeah, I have from 197 where he survives and keeps surviving, and he says, when you survive so much, you look for why? Why did I survive so much? And he says, but there has to be more, God. Why did you spare me? I'm ready. Give me the direction and I will follow it. When Woody Allen asked this very question to an alien in the movie Stardust Memories, the alien responds, tell funnier jokes. But that can't be it. Either way, I'm ready and I seek the answer every day. I am a seeker. I seek God. And then to know that it just, you know, you're left with that. Well, okay. And then it was over for him. It's just...
Gone too soon.
Yeah, it really, really is. Especially when he's finally ready or, you know, he's like, now I'm ready. Okay, I've done all of this. Now I'm really ready to get going with whatever I'm supposed to do. And what we're left with is the book. So was it the book?
I guess that is a question to ask. The impact now that will be made because of what happened to him, you know, does that drive home the lessons he was trying to teach us even more so?
It's sort of with our last week's subject, Anne. She had written her memoir, for lack of a better term, and she was ready. She's like, I'm ready. I've got plans. I'm going to do all of this stuff. And two completely different ways that it was cut short, but both of them were standing on the precipice of what they felt like was going to be the rest of their life. But in both cases, what we are left with is their books.
Yeah. Well, I know you guys know this, you remember it, but just to kind of touch on some of the different things that transpired after Matthew Perry passed. There was a cast joint statement from the actors from Friends, and they said, quote, "We are also utterly devastated by the loss of Matthew. We were more than just castmates. We are a family. There is so much to say, but right now we're going to take a moment to grieve and process this unfathomable loss." And then it went on to say in time they would say more, but for now our thoughts and our love are with Matty's family, his friends, and everyone who loved him around the world. Mm-hmm. And then individually they started giving some tributes. Mm-hmm. Matt LeBlanc's Touched Me. His personal statement on Instagram, which was accompanied by several pictures of the two of them together, said, "It is with a heavy heart I say goodbye. The times we had together are honestly among the favorite times of my life. It was an honor to share the stage with you and to call you my friend. I will always smile when I think of you, and I'll never forget you. Never. Spread your wings and fly, brother. You're finally free. Much love, and I guess you're keeping the $20 you owe me." It literally made me cry. And then I wanted to share one other tribute, which came from Matt's own stepfather, Keith Morrison, who many of us know from Dateline. He didn't release a statement for a while, and then he did. And then on Giving Tuesday, actually the day before Giving Tuesday of 2023, on his Twitter account, now X, he wrote, "This is not the sort of thing I commonly do, this pitch, but this year is different, and tomorrow is Giving Tuesday. Do what you can. He would have been grateful." And then he put in a link to the Matthew Perry Foundation, which is an organization dedicated to helping those facing addiction. That Matthew Perry Foundation, of course, is something that's just come up recently.
Right.
As in honor.
Another legacy.
Another legacy in honor of his life work. And I will tell you that when I clicked on that and it opened with his face and some of like his scrawling signature, his words, it brought tears to my eyes. And Keith Morrison went on to say, "It is important to us as a family to honor Matthew's legacy. The potential that the Matthew Perry Foundation has to help those suffering with this disease is something we are proud to bring to the world."
Armchair psychologist.
And so I think that brings us to our armchair. And I just wanted to ask you, we this is something that we often will ask, what lessons did we take away from this?
Right. We didn't talk about Friends that much in this particular episode, and maybe people were expecting us to give more of a biography of him, but it's kind of honoring his wishes. He didn't want Friends to be the only thing that people talked about. It's the thing he's most well known for, but we want to talk about him as a person and how he felt and focus more on the book and his recovery, which is what he wanted. And to me, the other thing that he talked about a lot in this book is something that we have talked about through other episodes, like the Judy Garland episode. I know we've spoken of it, is that fame comes with such a price tag. There is people out there, and he even says that he wanted more than anything in the world to be famous. And once he got it, he said that he wished that he could get, this is my paraphrasing, like he wished that he could get it across to people. That is not it. This is not going to fill all those holes that you think that it's going to fill, and nobody's going to believe you. Nobody not famous is going to believe you because they're going to go, look at all the money you have. Look at everything. You've got all these, you dated Julia Roberts. You have all of everything. And he's like, but that's not it. That's not the everything that's going to fill all the emptiness inside of you. And he even talks about another point where he has a friend who didn't make it as an actor, lives like in a rent-controlled apartment, has diabetes, has all these issues, and he says, I would trade places with him in a heartbeat because it's not worth it. None of the fame has been worth what also came with it, the price tag that came with it. So I know we do a podcast about entertainment. We talk about people in entertainment. We wouldn't know Matthew if it wasn't for fame. Right. But it feels like Matthew would rather have just been someone that we never knew because he would trade that for, I don't even, how do I phrase this? You know what I'm trying to say, right?
I
it's
do.
like,
Yes.
So it's not the be all end all. It's not what we all think that it is, and it's not going to fill the emptiness.
Yeah, that was something he actually quoted a couple of times. I think it might have been in the book and in an interview. He said, Jim Carrey once said, I wish everybody had their dreams fulfilled so that they could realize that's not it. That's not the answer. And he talked about how true that is. One of the, you and I have said off mic, one of the phrases that he used quite a bit was the fact that he was one of the only people in the world. Actually, I think he said it was him and Michael J. Fox, the only two people in the world who ever had this number one movie at the same time that they were in the number one TV show. And he said, you would think that I would have been on top of the world. And
He wasn't.
No, he had nothing. He had nothing. I think that you named what would have come to my mind as well. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that he was adamant. He didn't want to be remembered for friends first. He wanted to be remembered first for helping others, which is why I wanted to end with this clip from him, because I feel like, to me, this was a nice representation of the point that he makes throughout his book. And so I'd like to let him say it.
Yeah.
Just a brief lesson in alcoholism for you guys that don't know, and addiction, of course. It's a disease. That's the first thing I didn't know. In 1956, I think the American Medical Association said it was a disease. And it's a two-pronged disease. Two things happen to me and 10 million other people in the United States. It's an obsession of your mind. So what that means is you think of a martini, and then slowly but surely it's the only thing you can think about. You can't think about anything else. I got to get a martini. I know I'm supposed to be over here working, but I got to get another martini. Martini. And then once you take that martini, you break the membrane of sobriety. And once you do that, the obsession is gone, but the allergy of your body, which is the second prong of the disease, takes over and says, oh, now we're drinking. I'm going to make you drink as much as you did last time and more. It's progressive, so I'm going to make you drink more than you did last time. And you can't stop. I could not stop unless I was locked away somewhere. And at times, I would call drug dealers and have drugs brought into the place I was locked up in, because I was desperate and begging for drugs, because the only way I had to feel better. And I did not, it makes you forget too. It's calming, baffling, and powerful. So that thing that I read in the book, alcoholism, didn't care about that. And alcoholism did not care that I was on Friends. And alcoholism did not care about any of that. Alcoholism wants you alone. It wants you sick, and then it wants to kill you. In the book, I compare it to the Joker, because the Joker just wants to see the whole world burn, and so does alcoholism and addiction. And it took over decades of my life, and I pray to you, if you worry that you're having this problem, or you know somebody that is, raise your hand, find somebody who's smarter than you about this, and talk to them, and be honest about it, because the secrets are what kill us.
I just found that so powerful. I feel like that was his mission. That's what he had decided he was meant to do, was to help other people. And when he said, it's the secrets that kill us, find some help. And then he had strategically started working to give people help. He put out this book. He was going on tour, giving interviews like that, where he was putting out calls like that.
Yeah.
He was already working on the Matthew Perry Foundation. So that's where Matthew was putting his energy, was to helping other people. And
even by recording the audiobook, he literally left us his voice.
He did.
And his story.
He did. And so I know Matthew would want me to read this little sentence that I believe appears on his website and in his book. It says, if you or someone you know is struggling with substance abuse, please contact the SAMHSA helpline, that stands for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And that helpline number is 1-800-662-HELP. And so a big cheers to you, Matthew. We miss you. Thank you for being a helper. Thank you for being an advocate. And thank you for being a friend. Cheers.
Cheers.
If you love what we do, please rate and review our show. Or you can become a supporter by making a donation through buymeacoffee.com/scandalwaterpod. Whether a single gift or a recurring monthly donation, it would go a long way towards supporting our work and allowing us to keep the tea brewing.
At our website, www.scandalwaterpodcast.com, you can submit questions or your own story ideas, access our sources and show notes, see the merch we offer for sale, and more. You can join the Scandal Water community through our Scandal Water Podcast Facebook page, or follow us on Instagram or TikTok at Scandal Water Podcast.
This episode was executive produced by Candy Thomas, that's me, and Ashley Raymer Brown.
That's me.
It was researched and written by Candy Thomas and edited by Ashley Raymer Brown.
A special thank you to Josh Martin, who wrote, composed, and performed the Scandal Water theme and other music, Matt C. Adams, who created the artwork, and Joshua Reith, who designed our website and provides ongoing technical support.
As a reminder, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes. The thoughts and opinions of the host during each episode of Scandal Water are their own and do not reflect the opinions of any future guests, advertisers, or clearly professional psychologists. Thanks for listening.